October 26th. It's just after 7 p.m., so we're going to get going with our hearing. This is for a comprehensive permit on Dupy Street. And the goal of tonight's meeting is to have the peer reviewers explain their peer reviews. We have two peer reviews that were done. One for architectural preliminary peer review, and the other one for the comprehensive permit peer review. They were done, the first one by Davis Square and the other one by Tetra Tech. These are on file with the town, and they're also available at the zoning board website. This evening we have zoning board members with us tonight: David Anderson, Bob Fitzgerald, Drew Delaney, and Suzanne Murphy was here and just popped off, maybe coming back in. We also have Director of Community and Economic Development, Ashley Clark, and the Zoning Board Administrative Secretary, Amy Messier. We also have with us Judy Barrett. Judy's a consultant for 40B projects. We have our town council, George Pucci, with us, and the applicant, Mr. Lou Petrozzi. So that being said, once we get everybody lined up, what I'd like to do is start with the peer review comments, and we're going to go over this. So everybody at home or any neighbors interested, I already said that this is available online, the peer reviews, and you can take a look at that. Okay. So does anybody have anything else procedurally to discuss? Okay. One member, Jane Coffey, is not with us tonight. She's going to review the minutes and also the video, so she will be able to continue taking part in the public hearing. Okay. I'm just looking to see if Suzanne's coming back in. Ashley, do you have Suzanne on standby someplace?
Where did she go? I thought.
I think we lost her.
That happened to me too. I got kicked out a couple of times.
I did that.
Oh.
Which was an accident.
Right. I won't take it personally.
I did it to Suzanne, and it would just put her in the attendees. Let me try and call her. She has someone helping her, so she should be.
Okay. And just so everybody at home, if you're watching this, you understand it's important that all the zoning board members be here for this, because it is a requirement that everybody participates in the hearings and the process of everything. So we want to make sure everybody's included. Okay, seeing that everybody's waiting, we're gonna start this, and Suzanne can catch up and she can review the meeting. George, do you think that's okay?
Sorry, yes.
Okay.
Want to take the discussion out of order?
The discussion of, well, what do you mean, Ashley?
I just wondered if you wanted to take George's update.
That would be,
Sure. Do you have an update for us, George?
yes. Thanks, John. Good evening, John and members of the board. George Pucci from Town Council's office. And just a preface, that would be preferable to move things around a little. You're better to have the member present so that she doesn't have to wave in later. So hopefully this will give her a little bit more time, but I won't unnecessarily delay my discussion either. So the agenda item that you had on for tonight was a status update and possible vote concerning the Burns Avenue 40B. And just to bring you up to date, you will recall that you issued an order, a comprehensive permit with conditions and approval of the permit. The applicant appealed that to the Housing Appeals Committee. In the meantime, the applicant filed a notice of project change, and the board issued a determination on that notice of project change that the board found it substantial. Then, due to the COVID emergency and the state provisions that are in effect under the special legislation, which is I don't have the site handy, but Chapter 53 of the Acts of 2020, you deferred opening the public hearing on the notice of project change while the state of emergency was pending. And what you intended to do when you notified the applicant was you were going to open a public hearing on the notice of project change within 45 days of the termination of the state of emergency, as was your right to do under the act that I just cited to you. After that, a couple of things occurred. The applicant filed some paperwork with the HAC, the Housing Appeals Committee, to seek to proceed with his appeal of the original comprehensive permit decision. And another thing that he has done is recently he retained counsel to represent him in the Housing Appeals Committee appeal. And we recently had a conference of counsel with the Housing Appeals Committee, and that consisted of counsel and the presiding officer at the Housing Appeals Committee. So she asked about the status and the board's finding on the notice of project change, inquired about what was going on, and she raised a concern, which I think is legitimate, that, whatever happens with the COVID state of emergency, it looks like we're going to be talking about remote hearings and meetings, for the foreseeable future, at least into 2021. So she asked that I, go back to the board and discuss this issue with them, possibly to reconsider whether the board wanted to go forward and, in fact, schedule a public hearing on the notice of project change. I agreed with her that I would do that. It's always a good idea to cooperate with the presiding officer to the extent you can, unless you're really up against a legal issue that you really have to pursue and litigate and appeal. So I agreed to get back to the board to discuss this issue and report back to her. The other thing that she raised at the conference of counsel is the applicant's attorney advised the Housing Appeals Committee that he intended to go forward with a motion to seek to have the Housing Appeals Committee maintain jurisdiction over the project change. And they recognize that it's been deemed substantial by Mass Housing. You made the determination in accordance with your regulations. But what he said that his intended grounds would be that the project change, even though it increases the number of units, it actually improves the project and the effect on the neighborhood. due to changes that have been made. So he notified the Housing Appeals Committee that he would proceed with that motion. In the meantime, the presiding officer gave him a deadline of November 12th to file that, and asked that I confer with the board about, possibly proceeding with the public hearing, and that she wanted to hear back also by November 12th. So that's the procedural status. So if the board maintains its current position that it does not want to open the public hearing on the notice of project change, I would report that back to the Housing Appeals Committee, to the presiding officer, and that would also trigger the applicant's attorney to go ahead and file that motion that he notified the Housing Appeals Committee that he would file, to have them keep the jurisdiction over the notice of project change by November 12th, 2020. Now, you had previously made a very reasoned decision on why you were deferring opening the public hearing. You have other 40Bs, including this applicant, and another project that you're proceeding on. You're doing your best under these difficult circumstances with the Zoom hearings to do what you can in a deliberate manner, and that you were exercising your right, which you had the right to do under the state of emergency and the special legislation, to defer opening the public hearing on the notice of project change because it had not been opened previously. A couple of things have changed since your original decision on that I did want to update the board about. Number one, there's been a guidance document issued by the Department of Housing and Community Development that they make, if they receive evidence that a particular board, not your board, a particular board is hearing other types of applications but refusing to go forward with 40Bs, they may consider that a violation of their the regulation, which requires boards to treat 40Bs as equally as possible with other applications. They're not saying that they will rule that way, but they're saying that they may consider that, and they're issuing sort of a caution to boards concerning that issue. The other issue that came up, which is very important for you to be notified about if you have not been already, is the governor recently filed on September 30, 2020, a fiscal year 2020 supplemental budget bill, and to the House and Senate. It covers budget items, but buried at the bottom of that bill is proposed amendments to Chapter 53 of the Acts of 20.
Excuse me, can I have my shit back, and can you please?
So that legislation proposes amendment to Chapter 53 of the Acts of 2020. The most important one for you to know about would be, it replaces that provision, the state provision of a time period of 45 days following the termination of the state of emergency, which has not yet kicked in because the state of emergency is still in effect, so that 45-day period has not kicked in. However, what this proposal does is it substitutes that language in its entirety, and it substitutes a date of December 1, 2020. So I respectfully am coming back to the board tonight to raise these issues with you, to let you know what the presiding officer requested that we do, to update you as to what occurred, and also to update you as to new developments concerning the stay, and possibly changing your mind maybe about scheduling the public hearing on this, because even if the applicant were unsuccessful in his motion practice with the Housing Appeals Committee, and by the way, we would have a chance to respond to that motion following the filing of it. But even if the Housing Appeals Committee did not grant that motion and did not keep jurisdiction of the notice of project change, you're not, if that legislation passes, you're not buying yourself a whole lot of time by it, being a December 1, 2020 date by which you would have to open the public hearing anyway. So, and one thing I would recommend that the board do, and I'm sure that you agree with it, is you want to keep you want the hearing of the notice of project change to take place before you. You don't want that to occur at Housing Appeals Committee, where you don't have the chance to participate in that as a board. The public doesn't have a right to participate in it. It would all be in those Housing Appeals Committee proceedings, and then a decision would ultimately be rendered down the line. So, you know, you do want to exercise jurisdiction over this notice of project change. You want to hear that matter publicly. You want to be able to ask questions and flesh that project change out. And you would be deprived of that right, you know, if it goes forward at Housing Appeals Committee. So, you know, I would caution you concerning that. And I would also just update you as to recent developments with this upcoming probable change in the stay provisions under the special legislation. And I wouldn't want to see you get caught short with that, you know, by continuing to defer. Then the legislation is enacted. You can't defer much beyond, you can't defer beyond December 1 anyway, if that passes. And you have the possibility of Housing Appeals Committee keeping jurisdiction of the notice of project change, which is not a great way to go. You would have appellate rights concerning that down the line, but by then you have a decision from the Housing Appeals Committee. You would have a right to appeal to Superior Court, but the Superior Court would apply a deferential standard of review to a state administrative agency decision. So you would have an uphill battle in terms of the burden at that point. And then also in light of, you know, COVID-related issues that where a court might have found that HAC had exceeded its jurisdiction by keeping that notice of project change, which you had rightfully declared to be substantial, you know, they might possibly be influenced to rule in favor of the Housing Appeals Committee under these circumstances where, you know, remote meetings and hearings are taking place during this state of emergency. So, you know, that's quite a mouthful that I gave you, but if you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to answer them. One thing I would request is either consensus, some type of direction back to me if short of a vote of what to report to the Housing Appeals Committee concerning my addressing these issues with you.
George, thank you for that update on the Burns Avenue 40B project. So you need something from the zoning board by November 12th. That's you need something by then. Is that correct?
Yes, but you know, it would be good if we could know tonight, if you had the ability to let me know tonight, so that I could, you know, as a courtesy. And it's always better to limit disagreement and contentiousness as much as you can. As a courtesy, it would be good to be able to give HAC your decision on this so that the applicant doesn't have to go forward with unnecessary motion practice if he can avoid it. So I know that counsel for the applicant has probably been deferring, spending the time and effort on getting that motion finalized until we've had a chance to address this beforehand. So I would recommend if we can get an answer tonight, that would be great. But I would definitely recommend not waiting until, you know, the eve of November 12th for me to tell them, because then it sets it down the path of really the applicant has been left with no choice but to go ahead with that motion.
And George, just so that I understand, you're asking for the board to give you an answer to the question, what is the game plan for opening up hearings?
Yeah, really, as a practical matter, it's really, would the board be willing to open the public hearing on the notice of project change? And if so, when would it anticipate doing that? So that I could report something, you know, concrete back to the presiding officer.
Okay, and George, does that require public notice and 2 weeks in the paper for reopening the hearing?
Correct, it would be a public hearing. It would, yes. And you're not reopening the hearing. What you're doing is it's a new public hearing on the notice of project change.
Okay, but either way, it still requires notice of all the butters and in the newspaper.
Correct.
Okay, I think it's the right thing to do. Other board members, just what are your thoughts on that?
George, just a question on as I recall, is the appeal of the original proposal stayed pending our review of the project change, or is that appeal going to continue in parallel? I think one of the concerns the board had was which project are we,
Right.
I think there was also a request from the applicant to, if we could just agree on for, 5 or 6 issues, that then the appeal might go away.
Right.
So I didn't know how that all plays in the unique circumstances of that sort of context where we have competing proposals out there.
That's a really great question. The stay is actually formally lifted right now of the original appeal. So the lifting of that stay resulted in this recent conference of council.
Okay.
I would think, as a practical matter, if you were to open the public hearing on the notice of project change, there would be some discussion related to how, the new project would change other concerns you may have had. So I think that there would, as a practical matter, be some overlap. But as you know, and your question indicates that on a notice of project change, your public hearing is limited to that project change. But I think, again, as a practical matter, there's going to be some overlap on what could be changed or mitigated that, at least according to the applicant, maybe you would no longer have to impose that you imposed originally. I would think that would be part of this public hearing. Once, if I were to report back to the Housing Appeals Committee, you were opening the public hearing, my prediction would be that they would not go forward on that original appeal. She wouldn't want to spend time litigating that if potentially some issues can be mooted by the project change. So that would be my guess about how that would proceed. But right now, the stay is lifted.
Okay, and George, following up what Bob said, it's only fair that the zoning board has one project before us. We've already approved a comprehensive permit for Burns Ave. Now we have a modification plan. What is the plan that we're working off of? And can the applicant go back to the original plan? Those are my questions, and I think it's only fair for the town to know what is the plan of record that we're dealing with now.
That would be the project change.
Okay, any other board members have questions or comments?
I think it's important for the abutters of the project to definitely voice their concerns for any changes that may be relevant to the project. So I'd like to keep the jurisdiction within the Walpole zoning board.
Okay, so George, do you want me to have a motion made, or what do you want? Do you want consensus? What works for you?
Consensus would work. It's up to you if you want to take a formal vote, because some members may be opposed to it. But if I have consensus, that's fine. Another issue I would want to know would be if the consensus was to schedule a public hearing, when would you be intending to schedule that? That would be good information to have.
Yeah, that's why I asked about the notification. So I would say my feeling in board members, if you don't, first off, Bob, are you in favor of keeping it in Walpole, or what's your thoughts?
No, absolutely. I think the board should have jurisdiction in the first instance over the proposed modifications, and then, you know, depending on how that proceeding winds up, then we'll see where we are at that point.
Okay. So Suzanne?
Why are we not able to discuss this with our lawyer?
You can't, you could, not tonight, because you haven't put it on your agenda, but yes, it's pending litigation.
I mean, the applicant's sitting here with us and it's,
I understand, I you know,
I've got nothing to hide.
well, he
Suzanne,
does,
I
I
should
think,
know,
you know?
no, it's a very astute observation. Nothing I have said to you tonight is anything I would be concerned about the public or the applicant knowing. Because I'm still making very clear to you that
Yeah.
it's within your prerogative to not schedule it. But, you know, these updates about what the status is and what the foreseeable
I mean,
future
just the
looks like.
fact that we can't ask questions of our lawyer because of these circumstances feels very, very, very wrong to me.
Okay.
If you want to wait, you could always notice for another night an executive session. That's up to the board.
And Suzanne, we have another meeting on Wednesday for neighbors' comments on the Doopy Street project. So we don't have to do anything tonight. You know, I would like to have, you know, a conference call with you, George, just to make sure we're all tracking. Maybe we can do that between now and Wednesday. And I think we'd have. Do we have 48 hours, Amy, to add executive session to the agenda?
And John, the only hitch on that is I have a scheduling conflict for Wednesday that I cannot attend your meeting. And we have Amy Questle planning to cover Dupuy Street Wednesday for me, you know, knowing that was fairly routine, but I cannot meet with you Wednesday night.
No, we don't need, it's to just talk to you, you know, as the town council privately, so we're not in a public hearing.
Yeah.
I think, Suzanne, is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't Mr. Petrosi feel kind of funny if he met with his lawyer and we all sat around the table with him? I mean,
Okay, so
It's
I will.
kind of odd.
I'll coordinate with the board's availability because it's an executive session and we just need to do it before November 12th. So,
John, you can do it over the phone with him.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what, the board wants to keep jurisdiction in Walpole for the case. Now it's just a question of, George, you and I and whoever else, we can be on a conference call on this matter, nothing
Yeah.
else, and just find out procedurally how we want to move forward. So,
That's fine.
What I would recommend then is you've reached a pretty clear consensus tonight, subject to the chair speaking with council. I would recommend you speak to me along with Ashley, because your board can't meet,
right,
you know, by conference call, but I can certainly talk to you, attorney-client,
Right.
one, you know, the chair, along with Ashley. So if it's subject to that, and that gives me the ability to report following that, that works fine.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, and you also heard the consensus of the board. We'll just work out the details.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, we have our board members with us. Now, George, unless you have something else for us on that, what I'd like to do is go ahead and get the peer review comments going for tonight. And I have the two peer review, both of them dated October 19th. So, let's see. Mr. Bomer, you're on the top of my stack here. So do you want to go first? Or?
Okay, sure. Hi, I'm Cliff Bomer. I'm principal and president of Davis Square Architects. We're a firm that has done a lot of housing developments over the last 36 years or so. And the comment, I think I want to make a couple preliminary comments, because I think it would be really boring to read line by line in the report that I submitted. It's 5 or 6 pages long. So I assume the board members have read it, but I think what I would suggest is anybody else who may be listening, I'm not trying to skip over anything that I reported on. So it is posted, and there's a lot of detail in that report. And like I said, I think it would be really boring to read all of it. So I think to understand the context and maybe a little more drilling down on some of the comments I make, if you're interested, I would say read the report. I think that generally speaking, I see my role as kind of hierarchical, that for me, I need to understand the context, larger context of neighborhood, existing patterns of development, and want to look at that pretty carefully before looking at individual building plans. My own feeling is it's not necessarily the most productive to dig deep on what the buildings look like until you really understand the setting of the buildings. So having said that, I think we know what the existing pattern of development is in the area. I think I start my report by talking about this as a kind of one of development. And even though the existing pattern is kind of widely spaced single family homes set in the middle of their lots, Dupy, is it Dupy or Dupay Street? I've heard it pronounced both ways.
You were right the first time.
Dupy, okay. So the fact that Dupy doesn't connect all the way through Summit makes it kind of a one-of situation. So whereas the other streets are passable from both directions and experienced in one way, there's a kind of opportunity on Dupy Street that doesn't exist on the other streets, which is a kind of a micro neighborhood, kind of neighborhood that develops around a cul-de-sac, and which is something that's quite nice about that opportunity. Is I think it's something that could be beneficial both to the existing abutters on Dupy Street, which are not that numerous, but they've been there a long time, and it's their street, but also to the new residents of Dupy Street. So my perspective is really based on thinking of a kind of site plan that could really make it a very pleasant place to live. It's a home ownership opportunity for people. So I think it's worth looking at it from that perspective of how to maximize the value of it for existing abutters as well as the existing neighbors. It's challenging, I think, for existing neighbors, because even though the existing pattern of development is kind of backyard abutting backyard on parallel through streets, there's been a large stand of undeveloped area that people get used to, which I know it actually happened to me once, where I had a house with a significant backyard that opened on a big forest, and it eventually got developed. So that's important, analyzing the impact on the neighbors. It's really important. But I will say, just from, again, the bigger picture, it's not unusual that residents in that neighborhood have back-to-back backyards. I think a lot of the existing development, particularly the last 4 homes on Victoria Circle, have backyards that have cleared back what appears to be pretty close to the property line. So they would see pretty significant change in the way that they experience their own home. But I think the most important point for me is, having looked at the opportunities. It's a small site, it's very tightly packed, and I think the opportunities to really achieve that kind of balance that's both beneficial to existing residents and for future residents of Dupee Street. To kind of cut to the chase, for me, the density is too much. I think there's a cluster of 4 duplex homes. It's separated by a turnaround space, and then there are 2 more duplex homes. The spacing between the homes is only 11 feet, which renders that space really not programmable in any way. And you're in a neighborhood that or where people would move to typically to have a little more space around them. And in this current suggested plan, they're really looking across at 11 feet away to other bedrooms and other rooms in the building. And I tried looking at a lot of different ways that you could try to fit 12 units on that site and achieve really what I would consider to be acceptable levels of privacy within the homes. It's very challenging to do that. There isn't a whole lot of space to move the buildings around because of other concerns on the site. Stormwater management is one of them. But the more I looked at it, my conclusion was that the number of units and the size of each of the buildings was problematic. It created a lot of other issues that it certainly extended to impact on the neighbors. There was certainly no opportunity in the current scheme for retaining any of the screening or mature tree growth that's already there. It's my opinion, and I think Sean will address this more precisely and authoritatively than I can. It's my opinion that the site would probably have to be clear cut in order to develop it for a lot of reasons. Because of the spacing, the density of the site, even though it's only 12 units, that's not a huge development, but there's very limited usable open space on the site. I discussed in my report that a typical approach in this style of development would be to privatize rear yards associated with each of the apartments. I can't really tell from the site plan. There's a swale proposed at the back side of those buildings, so I don't really know how usable that space may or may not be. I do think there's a potential concern about a lack of parking spaces. The roadway that's provided into the site is only 20 feet wide, which is the minimum width that many fire departments would consider acceptable as a fire access lane. There's limited area for turning around emergency vehicles. The impact on the neighbors because of the density, I think, would be, certainly, again, it's other neighbors in that neighborhood are used to having people in their backyards. Some of these neighbors aren't used to it. And then going back to the issues of the future residents of the development itself, I think there are real privacy issues. I think there could be issues with people trying to visit the development. If they park on the street, it's narrowing the width of the street, that there could be problems. But going back to the very beginning, I think it's a real opportunity to develop I don't think it needs to look like the rest of the neighborhood. So when I looked at the architectural plans, they're not quite like other buildings in the neighborhood, and certainly clustering them so close to each other isn't typical. But again, it's kind of one of, because of the one-way and or the non-through circulation that is apparently baked into the plan. So I think ultimately, again, I don't want to go into too many details, My biggest issues are, having looked at a lot of ideas about how to potentially make that many units fit, I really couldn't do it that would preserve most of the aspects of what people who would buy there would be looking for. Other kind of technical issues that made it challenging to review the materials that were submitted were inconsistencies between the civil drawings and the architectural drawings. So there's a kind of a coordination step that's missing in the plans. We know they're schematic. Typically at this stage of drawing production, the civil drawings would be advanced beyond the architectural drawings. That's normal. There are a lot of issues associated with stormwater and other environmental issues that generally lead the way at this early stage of development. But it is important that the proposed architectural plans are the same plans that are represented on the civil drawings. That's fundamental. So I think we're, at a minimum, we're missing, even with the existing plans, we're missing another pass through the drawings to coordinate the drawings. But I think more importantly, I think there are ways of developing this site that would be a big improvement to the proposed. I mentioned two possible options in my report. One was, rather than having the buildings aligned exactly as they are, 11 feet apart, looking at each other, if you reoriented the buildings so the front entries were actually facing each other and they shared a common driveway, if you kept if you needed to have a garage for each of the units. I think if you did that, had face-to-face front doors, it would cut down on the density, but it would solve the privacy issues, and I think could potentially provide some usable outdoor space if the density was diminished. Another concept, again, based on my opinion, that it could be an anomaly. It doesn't have to look like all the other homes on the street. I think changing to a different townhouse type could potentially work. As it stands now, I think the 11 feet between the buildings is really not usable. It meets certain building code requirements, so you can still have windows, but I don't think people really take best advantage of having those windows in their unit given the proximity. Alternatively, you could do a more urban style of townhouse where there was no space between buildings, have clusters with just party walls. That could work, and potentially broaden the roadway so that you could park on the street, or there are other ways of developing the site that I think could take better advantage of having this opportunity of a kind of unusual setting given the rest of the pattern of development in the nearby neighborhood. So because I don't want to go through all of the 25 bullet points or so that I have in my report.
So we've got your report. You talked just tonight, you said density is too much, and then you also said the number of units and the size of the building is problematic.
Yeah.
So how do we solve that? How do we solve those two issues?
Well, I'm not the architect. I know how I would solve it. I think that for me, the unit count is too high to achieve what I think a lot of basic expectations would be, which would be adequate parking, sufficient turnaround space to keep the fire department and other emergency needs working well. I think that's, and then from the residents' perspective, privacy issues. some kind of fundamental, I think, expectations that people have when they move to a suburban setting like this. So I think that's kind of it. For me, is I think there are site plans that work very well and could work very well, that could keep existing neighbors less impacted and make future residents more satisfied.
Okay. Do any board members have any questions for Mr. Bowler?
I do.
Suzanne?
Cliff, do you realize this is a private road?
I do. Yeah, I do.
Okay.
And I read the report, so that I know in the initial or the earlier documents, there was an expectation, I think I mentioned this in my report, there was an expectation that the town might take over maintenance of the road. Then I did read the DPW and engineering department letter that didn't seem to think that that was the best idea.
Right.
That way.
So that's where I have a question on the parking on the street part, which will not be allowed. So there's no, as far as I'm concerned, there's gonna be no visitor parking that I can come up with, other than if you go park down at Starbucks and walk up the street, could visit someone. And the other issue we also have is snow removal. There is, that ain't happening. I don't know about like Amazon trucks and those things, those are all becoming out of control now too, and I don't know where that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Or recycling or dumpsters or anything like that. I don't know how any of that's gonna work either.
And I think that goes back, there just isn't enough space to solve those problems. And
There is not.
And I will say for the proponent, I'm not a person who's typically against density at all. I've done a lot of 40B reviews. My opinion is when you find a good 40B site, you should work to make it as dense as what works for the neighborhood and works for the developer. And this one, I think the balance is just, from my perspective, it's just tipped too far to be able to turn it into something that would function well over a long period of time, which to me is the true measure of sustainability. There are many, many sustainability factors that are just technical in what you build into the building, but ultimately you want people living there in the long run and becoming integrated into the community.
Thank you.
Okay. Dave, Bob, or Drew, any questions or comments for Mr. Bowler?
I had just a clarification for me on, you described the streets in the area as double loaded residential.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Can you just explain what that means? It struck me as a very narrow road. Yeah. And anyway, if you could explain what that means.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's just a technical term. Double loaded, whether it's a corridor or a road, means that there are, in this case, homes. In an apartment building, it would be units on either side of the corridor. So it's just, that's not what Doopy Street is. Doopy is a single loaded scheme. All of the buildings are shown on one side of the street, whereas most of the roads, and they are narrow, most of the roads that cut all the way through do have homes on both sides of the street, which is why you have that pattern of backyard to backyard. That it's completely typical, and when people are used to it, they find the best way to set up their yards the way they want their yards to be. That's not what's proposed for this site, though. There isn't space. There's no way to make this a double loaded scheme.
Okay, so just another follow-up on that. The 200 feet of Doopy right now is double loaded, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
Um,
That's right. And my understanding is that first 200 feet is currently maintained by the town, or have I misread something? Does the town plow that first 200 feet and pick up trash?
Yeah, they plow.
Okay.
So I guess just one other question. I mean, I appreciate the discussion of the sort of planning aspects of the project in terms of its fitting within the neighborhood and all, but also providing residents with, I think you described it as, satisfying whatever expectations they may have in terms of suburban living in a dense development like this. With regard to 40B projects that you've worked on, how do those types of factors sort of, how should the board consider them in relation to other considerations like health and safety or environmental type issues? Because it strikes, in my mind, there's always a tension between the purpose of 40B is to create affordable units, and as you say, put as much density as the site can withstand. But if you could just describe sort of situations where the density is so high that it makes the site not workable from either for health and safety reasons, but I think you're touching more on the architectural or open space and sort of living standards that are expected in any residential development.
Well, that's a really good question. And, I think that, I guess on this one, I mean, normally, most of my study is related to fit and impact, impact on existing people, generally speaking. And I would say in most developments, the type of safety issues that come up, for emergency vehicle access are sort of, there's not so much overlap with that, with the architecture, if that makes sense. And I think the reason is it kind of comes back to the space thing. What's unusual about this development is that it's both. I think the proposed architecture and open space and just kind of livability of the site is really impeded by fundamental issues, that do overlap into safety issues. A 20-foot roadway is as narrow as you could ever get, and if you have a couple of cars parked out there, you might have some very unhappy firemen. So this one, I think they've kind of collided. Normally, I don't talk. I mean, for me, as you restated, I think density can be a good thing as long as the other factors are balanced properly, which is impact on neighbors, and certainly at a point when the density really does start raising important safety issues, then it's about all of it. It's about the architecture, it's about the site plan. So I don't know if that's kind of what you were asking.
No, that's helpful. I'm just trying to understand the sort of the balancing that since our sort of scope of inquiry is much more limited here than it would be in a 48 type of case.
Right.
And waivers being requested and granted for various, otherwise applicable zoning requirements.
Well, I will say with most of it, because I do, and I know Sean does too, that looks at both urban settings and more suburban settings. And I would say that most suburban developments don't have quite the issues that this one does, which is surprising. It's only 12 apartments. That's not a big development. But the nature of this one has turned it into something different than I would say most suburban developments that I review, where you're looking at different different levels of detail, because generally just because you have more space to deal with. You know, this one it has as many parking. You know how many parking spaces it has, and you can't fit any more. That's kind of unusual in a suburban setting to be so locked in to 12 units, 24 parking spaces. That's it, and that's different for a setting with this kind of density in the surrounding area.
And just one other question, since you mentioned the 24 parking spaces, all of them are, I guess the parking spaces here are considered the garage space and one space in front of the garage, essentially.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Essentially, yeah, okay. So have you seen other 40B projects that have only provided that level of parking and didn't provide some additional location for visitor parking?
Probably not. Again, that's what's kind of unusual because it's such a small development, but to be so locked in as this one is, and then it's back to where you were before. We were asking before is that in most developments there are ways of enhancing that ratio, so that you can have delivery, you can have visitors coming. What's unusual with this one is if you imagine that it might get parked out because of a big party and then something bad happens, that's a different kind of issue, because it's very limited.
Okay, thank you.
I feel like I'm crossing over into Sean's. I apologize, Sean. You may completely disagree with me.
I'm just trying to figure out the right time to add stuff.
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
We'll get to Sean in just about 1 minute. I'm going to just
okay.
have Dave or Drew, any other questions or comments on the peer review? I think really what we're hearing is it's an issue of density, and
but I don't want to underemphasize the need to really know what you're looking at. So that coordination of the documents, that's really important. It just, the civil plans need to look like the architectural plans. They do. And the way the architectural plans are, I think and this is all in my report, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I think there are even potential building code issues in the building plan. So it doesn't have to go into design development. It's okay. These issues my questions are all schematic design issues. I'm not asking to know what brand of siding you're buying. It's really not that at all. Which is, I do want to make one more point, is I think the architectural peer reviewers are often looked at as, sort of as aesthetic reviewers. And we don't see ourselves as that, not at this stage. At this stage, I kind of view the kind of analysis I'm doing at this level as actual feasibility level. Like, is it doable? And, I can't make that judgment if I really don't understand if there's a back door, where does it go? Is there a basement? Is there a basement plan? There's just a lot of questions that's not a bad thing. It's just, there's another level of looking at the two schematic ideas together and coordinating them into something that is a real honest representation of what the proposal is.
Okay, thank you, Cliff. So now we'll go over to Sean with Tetra Tech, your peer review on the civil engineering and other site comments. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, everybody. Again, my name is Sean Reardon. I'm with Tetra Tech, and we're the civil engineering and traffic engineering review consultant. First thing I want to say is the plans and the documents that we reviewed were really well organized, professionally done, and I can't state this enough after having seen some really poor plans. It definitely makes our job easier, and we definitely appreciate it. Similar to Cliff, our comments are all listed on a letter. We had some 40 or 50 comments. Some are more substantive, some are sort of pedantic and detailed, but they're required to be addressed nonetheless, just as a matter of bookkeeping and record keeping. Cliff touched on a lot of the issues that we're also concerned about. The principal one being is Doopy Street is not a typical road. So in Walpole, a typical road is a 46-foot right-of-way. This is a 27-foot right-of-way. So it's almost 40% reduction, or a little bit more than half what's typical. Now, it's important to understand, too, that the right-of-way is kind of like the relief valve, right? That's the area that's available for miscellaneous uses that nobody thought of or don't get thought of on a regular basis. So the reason a right-of-way is 40 feet and a roadway is, say, 26 feet is because you need space for utilities, you need space for snow removal, you need space for kids to walk, you need space for kids to throw their bikes. So the concern I keep coming back to is that, yes, we have a dense site, but it's also combined with a drastically reduced right-of-way. So when you have a dense site and then you don't have that relief valve that's typical of a standard right-of-way, well, now you're really heightening the issues. So just for reference, the road is 20 feet. Standard road by your subdivision regulations for a residential development is 26 feet. So that's almost a quarter smaller than what's typical. Again, your right-of-way is almost half of what's typical. So all combined with, as Cliff says, a relatively dense development that doesn't create flexibility or relief anywhere on that, you end up with this sort of combination of things that really put stress basically everywhere. And Cliff did mention too that the building sizes shown on the site plan seem to be a bit smaller than the building shown on the architectural plans. Normally that's not a terribly important concern, but in this case, it makes it even worse. So, it's important, like Cliff said, to get those things matching in unison so we know we're looking at a true representation of what the available site is. Another way that this sort of tension in space manifests itself in a negative way is if you look at the site, it goes uphill as you enter it. So all of these units will be above the units below it. Now, the site is all wooded, and it's going to be changed to all developed. Now, what that does is it creates a lot of stormwater that wasn't generated under the current conditions that needs to be mitigated. They've done a pretty good job of designing a system that mitigates it, but if you look at the way it's built, it's basically a big, huge impoundment of water that's located directly above the other houses. So if you just look at the plans, the detention pond is multiple sizes bigger than the houses below it, but all that water is 5, 6, 7 feet higher than those houses that are directly below it. So we're used to seeing stormwater basins that are constructed in holes or surrounded by dirt that is naturally occurring. In this case, it's a built wall that contains this impoundment of water. So Bob, to your point, from a safety concern, you've got a really heightened safety concern that you've got a large impoundment of water basically spills over a wall onto the roadway when it exceeds its capacity. And there's literally no space around it for any kind of maintenance or any kind of adjustment. So it shows you an example of how, if you look at a plan in a cursory way, it seems like things fit, but when you look at it differently, you find all these stresses and all these problems that, you can draw it like it fits, but in practical application, it doesn't really work, and it sometimes won't work in really, really bad ways. A similar issue is the way they have their turnaround design. If you look at it, it looks all right, but in reality, you don't know if that turnaround is clear until you get up there. So there's no way for you to know if you're a fire truck or you're a delivery truck, whether there's somebody parked in that turnaround, whether there's a pile of snow in that turnaround, whether there's a bunch of kids playing street hockey in that turnaround. So from our standpoint, it's again, it doesn't work as well because when you have a cul-de-sac like your subdivision regs require, there's a lot of flexibility in a 104-foot cul-de-sac, right? You get up there, there's a lot of ways to get around things. If somebody's parked or something's stuck in the turnaround that's up the street, there's nothing left to do. You don't even have a 26-foot roadway to turn around, and you've got a 20-foot roadway to turn around. So all I keep thinking about is, there was that Austin Powers movie where he's trying to turn his little truck around inside that hallway, and he just keeps bouncing off the wall on both sides. That's a similar situation you're going to have here, where, if a delivery truck comes up the street and can't use that turnaround, and there's driveways are full of cars because people have their garages full of stuff. I don't know about you, but my brother has a 3-car garage, and he has 3 cars outside his garage, and the rest of his garage is filled with stuff. In this case, we say there's 2 parking spaces on each site, but in practical reality, a lot of those garages will get filled with stuff. So my big concern is that everything compounds on itself when everything is stressed. It even extends to construction. How do we construct a site in a responsible way when every square inch of it is devoted to some sort of development? Even managing stormwater during construction, everything from this construction site would run right down the hill into High Plains Street, which is a pretty busy street. And stormwater guidelines say you can't use your detention basin, your permanent detention basin, for temporary construction stormwater control. So what we want to see is a construction phasing plan as to, how is this even achievable given the density that you show? We also looked at traffic. Traffic was, in most cases, traffic is usually the hot button issue that everybody's worked up about. In this case, like Cliff says, it's a pretty small development, so there's not a whole lot of volume being generated. So you're not likely to see any impacts on intersection efficiency or intersection performance. I think there was some good discussion about the need or lack thereof for a sidewalk. I think given the density of the site and the fact that it's really only one way in, one way out, you're only going to see people from the development in there or people that are known to those people. So I think it takes away some of the premium for needing a sidewalk. But all things being said, I think this site it's a pretty cool site to develop. There's definitely things that can be done, although I think at this density, it presents challenges that, in my opinion, don't seem solvable right now, particularly as we get into some of these other issues a little bit deeper, like the stormwater and the access issues. But to Cliff's point, maybe if at a reduced density, some of these problems with the Doopy Street right-of-way and the available width there, we start to lessen the sensitivity to that and start to come up with something that is still dense or denser than certainly otherwise would be allowed, but maybe not too dense.
Okay, thank you, Sean. I do have one question for you, Sean. On traffic, point number 43, you talk about the 85 percentile. And when I did go there, I was trying to pull out to High Plains Street. And I was wondering, as far as the site distances, did you take a look at the site distances at the 85 percentile speed?
Well, what we did, I looked at the site distances in general. So the 85th percentile speed hasn't been established yet because that's done by doing traffic counts and recording the speeds on the vehicles. I didn't feel like there were many people going 35 miles an hour. That's for sure. The site distances looked pretty comfortable in both directions, particularly as you're looking towards Route 1. But the big thing is I think it's important to document what the 85th percentile speed is, if for no other reason than to just have a good record of that concern. Because one of the things that the applicant has agreed to do and Carl Baldoff recommended is the approved plans should show the site triangles, and the site triangles are shown on the plan so you can make sure to keep them clear. The site triangles at 35 miles per hour will be smaller than the site triangles at a higher speed. So although the project may still meet the site distance requirements, the 85th percentile speed, knowing that, provides us a better record of what areas we need to maintain going forward.
Okay, thank you. Any other board members have questions or comments for Sean?
Me.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
John, have you done any of the drainage calcs or anything to do with this project?
We reviewed all the applicant's stormwater calculations, yes.
And I don't know if you've heard of the reputation of this area. It's one of our worst drainage areas in town.
Okay.
I don't know if you knew that, but it's bad. It's like all shale and it's, most of the people up there have water in their cellars now, and we're not, I feel we shouldn't exasperate that, or I don't even think we're allowed to exasperate that.
You're correct. So the Massachusetts stormwater standards require you to mitigate your peak runoff, so that's why they have that big detention basin, because they're generating so much more runoff under the proposed condition than the existing condition. That doesn't really affect groundwater too much. So, when people have water in their basements, that can be from a multitude of
There's springs. There's multiple springs there too.
Yeah, then all I can say is from what we reviewed, they have test pits, they have logged the test pits. Their design applies the information that they saw in the test pits appropriately. There were some modifications that we suggested that they make to be in compliance with the standards, but there's nothing to suggest that what they've designed doesn't come close to meeting the standard.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Drew.
Can you touch upon the catch basin and its uses permitted or not during the construction sequence again?
Yeah, so under the guiding principle that we use here in Massachusetts is there's what's called the Massachusetts Stormwater Management Standards. And it's kind of the rule book by which these drainage designs are done. In it requires that you not compromise your future permanent basin location by directing construction runoff to it. So in this case, that basin infiltrates water into the ground, and it's a pretty important function of it. If it no longer infiltrates water, then it's not doing what it's supposed to do. If you have a bunch of construction sediment and debris that goes to it during construction, high potential that it clogs up the soils underneath it and makes it not do what it's supposed to do. So the way you prevent that from causing a problem is you have separate construction settlement ponds in a different location than the stormwater basin. Usually that's not a big deal because you've usually got plenty of space around your detention basin to play around with, space that would be otherwise like, the access road around a basin or the area leading up to a basin. In this case, the basin is pretty narrowly defined because it's constructed out of retaining walls, and it's in a tough location to begin with. So it doesn't really leave a whole lot of options for managing construction runoff.
So I've seen in past instances where they use something similar to like a rain for rent or something that can temporarily handle, runoff from a project like that. Is that something that you would normally see in an application, or is that something the board should be conditioning part of the project? And or I guess I know that's why you're kind of leading towards wanting to see the sequence of the construction build out, but I guess, can you recommend anything for the board moving forward regarding that?
Yeah, I'd recommend that the applicant provide a construction phasing plan which shows how they're going to accommodate that. Just Drew, on that note, the rain for rent things that you see are usually for like excavation dewatering. So in that case, you're dealing with much lower volume of water than when it rains, you're generating a lot of runoff. So you really need a much bigger volume to handle the runoff that's coming from the site during construction. Typically, the way they'll do it is they'll just dig a temporary hole somewhere. There's pretty specific guidance on how big that hole needs to be, depending on how much of the site you've got disturbed. It's 3,600 cubic feet per acre. So, every acre that you disturb during construction, you need to provide volume equivalent to about 3,600 cubic feet in order to meet the requirement for managing the runoff from construction. And a rain for rent's not going to give you that volume. And a rain for rent is above ground, so you can't get the water into it. So, it's good if you're pumping it, but if it's running off the ground, you really just need a hole somewhere. But unfortunately, that hole shouldn't be where the future basin's gonna be.
Okay.
This area is a slope.
Yep.
Yep.
And it's the narrow slope, so
Yeah.
there's not a lot of room to deal with these issues.
Nope.
And I know Janice won't be happy if she gets a bunch of water running into her garage.
I don't think any of them will be.
Okay, Dave or anybody else have any questions or comments? Bob?
Yeah, just on the stormwater topic, it looks just from looking at the grading and utilities plan that there's portions of the site that may not actually drain towards the drainage basin. When you get back to units 11 and 12, it looked like the property kind of slopes down toward
Some.
town of Wall property. And then also, it almost has kind of like almost a humpback kind of topography where, one half of the site's going to drain in one direction, the other half of the site's going to drain down to a different direction. It looks like the swale that's, provided on the Victoria Circle side is designed to capture stormwater and direct it to the drainage basin, but I'm just curious, is that basin really going to capture and manage all of the stormwater on the site, or is there going to be some sheet flow off the site?
There's definitely going to be some sheet flow off, and like you referenced, Bob, is particularly towards Summit Avenue. But what they've done is they've shaped the site so that they split the flow up in an appropriate way to match those pre-development characteristics. So what they've done is in their initial analysis, they determine based on the existing conditions how much water goes in each direction. And to your point, there's a hump right in the middle where the turnaround is. So part of the existing flow ends up going towards Summit, and predominant flow goes down towards High Plain. Now, what they can do is they don't have any stormwater control features, but what they can do is they can match pre-development by shifting that drainage divide more towards their pond, so they're matching the pre-development characteristics. They've come close enough to that, and I can tell you that they'll be able to solve that problem. The question is whether they can solve the detention basin problem in a practically achievable way, in a safe way.
And do you know sort of what level storm would cause that basin to overtop? Like, are we talking 10-year storm, 100-year storm? What's the design standard, and what does this one achieve?
So the important thing is if it functions the way it's designed to function, which goes back to the whole issue with construction, that pond should store the 100-year event and then still have a certain amount of freeboard above to store some storm above that. What we've asked for is to just, for frame of reference, to provide at what rainfall event does that pond start spilling over. I mean, if you can think about it, you drive up Doopy Street, you're going to look to your right, you're going to see a retaining wall of some sort. Behind that retaining wall is going to be the stormwater basin that's going to be full of water. If that pond overtops, the water's just coming over the top of that wall. That's not a traditional application. Usually we have some sort of a gradual rip-rap spillway or something like that, and water sort of meanders through to a wetland. In this case, it's going to overtop, it's going to hit the side of the road and go down the road to High Plain Street. So it's just basically the issues that get created in that application. But we've asked them to tell us exactly what rainfall intensity will overtop that pond, because these are just design storms. When you hear the term 2-year storm, 10-year storm, 100-year storm, they don't exist in real life. Those are just things that we engineers use as sort of tools to approximate certain conditions. I can guarantee you there will be a storm in the future where that pond will overtop. We just like to know kind of how much rain it's going to need in a 24-hour period in order to do that. But it would be over the 100-year event.
you good?
You're muted, Bob.
Trying to prevent my large dog who's breathing heavily back here to picking up on the microphone. So if it overtops it's going to obviously just flow in whatever direction it wants to go from that point. So that would include the downstream home and, Dupee Street and potentially the back, like some of the backyards of the Victoria Circle. I'm just trying to get an understanding.
Well, they do have what's called a spillway defined that directs the flow over directly to Dupee Street. But
Okay.
in practical application, it works like you described, because if you can imagine, there's a top of wall elevation around this basin that really sets the spillover elevation. I'm sure during the final design they can design a way through that wall that directs the flow towards Dupee Street. But right now, the way it's shown on the plans, it's just crests over the top and spills out on all sides.
And sorry, just one last question on this. There's a top of berm elevation. Is that the top of the retaining wall, or is that below the top of the retaining wall? I guess it's not clear from the plan.
It's at or near the top of the wall. What we've asked for is to provide top and bottom of wall elevations to make that clear.
Okay. Thanks.
And the other thing that's shown too is they show like a segmental block wall, so a big like gravity wall. I don't think you'll be able to do that if you're impounding water behind it, because in order for that wall to retain the water, it's going to have to be more substantial than just a gravity wall.
One last quick one, Sean. It says on here the elevations, that the summary of elevations don't match the elevations on the plans.
Yeah, there was just one or two tables in the stormwater report that didn't carry through elevations that are used on the plan. I don't think it's anything major, but it should be addressed in the future submittals.
Okay.
I just have not to beat a dead horse, but I just want to confirm what I'm hearing, that both parties, both peer reviews, have common concerns with the safety and accessibility of this development site, i.e. Dupee Street access point width being as narrow as it is, and the lack of parking. I mean, it's hard to imagine a scenario of these units being built and sold and having there be, I know that throughout the course of the day, and obviously during peak times, people typically go to work and or school at the same times. One would think, be scenarios where people would be walking up and down Dupee Street to access these homes. And like a point that was made, in the event that there was no guest parking or visitor parking, and you can't park on High Plains Street, the only place that you can park is on the left or right of Dupee Street, and that just becomes an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, and David, just what I ask you to keep in mind is the narrowest one-way street is 20 feet. The narrowest two-way street is like 24 feet. In this case, you've got the minimum width needed for fire protection for emergency access, combined with what we would consider a lot of units really close to the road, with a single garage and a single parking spot for each. I can't envision a scenario where parking won't be a stress on Dupee Street.
Okay, unless, does anybody have any other questions for Sean? Okay, Judy Barrett, how are you?
Hi, Judy.
When I'm not on mute, I'm fine.
So we've heard a lot from the peer reviewers, and I just want to check in with you and make sure that we're doing things that we should be. Are we missing something? I keep hearing the word about the site, the development level on the site. Those are the words I'm hearing. What's your thoughts, or what are your comments and guidance for the zoning board?
Well, again, the issue in a 40B review is always what's the impact. It's not so much the number of units, it's what's the impact of that development on public health, public safety, environmental impact. What are those impacts, and is there a way to mitigate them? And that, I think, is always the question the board has to wrestle with. Is there a way to mitigate these impacts? And if there is, then you go for the mitigation. And if there isn't, then I think you have to evaluate, whether the regional need for housing outweighs the impact that you're trying to address and can't. If the board is concerned about that the number of units, not because of any kind of, visceral reaction about density, but simply because there's evidence of an unmitigatable impact. If that's the concern, then what the board needs to do soon is ask the applicant to reduce the number of units. And if the applicant says, no, I won't do it, then we need to look at evaluating the finances of the project and determine whether it's feasible for them to meet you part way. But that's how the process works. Of course, the applicant obviously has an opportunity to respond to the peer review comments, may agree with them, may not, but I think you kind of have to know that first. But ultimately, it comes down to whether you think the concerns you have can be mitigated in some way. If not, then you move into this discussion with the applicant that involves, the economics of the project, which, you may or may not get the answer you want.
Okay, well, I think that actually gives us a good point for, where we're at for tonight, because the applicant is with us tonight, now has the copies of the peer review and can go back and address these issues and concerns. And it sounds like Judy, is that what you're saying is the way to proceed? That this is now for the applicant to address these issues on the peer review?
Yeah, I think the applicant needs to respond to the peer review reports. That's kind of the way this works.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Petrosi, good evening. You have the two copies of the Tetra Tech and the Davis Square peer reviews. So is there a time that, you want to address these, or, what's the way to move forward for you?
Well, I think we would spend our time looking at the Tetra Tech review letter and try to address the items that are technically applicable to the project regarding drainage and traffic and other things of that sort that Sean has discussed. Not quite sure about the Davis Square review. That review pretty much is an opinion of how the project should be designed. It seems to me that everybody seems to think that there's too many units in too small a space. That seems what I've got out of the discussion tonight, which is not untypical of what peer reviewers do during this stage of the process. But we'll take a look at the engineering details raised by Tetra Tech, and we'll, as we mentioned during the last meeting, you authorized our engineers to have direct communication with the peer reviewers. So unfortunately tonight, Rob Truax at GLM is out of circulation for the next week and a half. So we would think that in 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks, whenever you folks are having another meeting, that probably within the next 3 weeks that we could probably address these comments. What is the plan for the meeting on Wednesday night?
So the plan for Wednesday night is to give the neighbors who have been listening to this meeting, and they've also have a copy of these peer review reports, to give them a chance to comment and provide the board with information from their perspective. So that's what we're going to be looking at Wednesday night.
Okay, so I would ask that the board, from my perspective, when would the board be thinking about having another meeting, or what's your scheduled plan for?
Yeah, we've actually looked forward to this, and Ashley, you just had your hand up. What are the dates that we were looking at for this?
So we have the 28th for public comment, and then November was almost impossible to schedule any dates, because we're trying to balance the Summer Street project. So we've penciled, December 2nd.
Okay, well, we would agree to the December 2nd, continuance. And, in the meantime, we probably will have, with the chairman's permission, to have some conversation with the peer reviewers and discuss, whatever, the remedies are that they've raised as concerns, and, submit something probably 2 weeks or thereabouts prior to the meeting on December 2nd.
And if I could add, so that folks, as attendees or watching on cable know, I will be part of all of those conversations.
You will?
Yeah.
Well, I don't understand how we're going to coordinate a conversation by phone with you, Ashley, and the peer reviewer. I don't think that's gonna happen.
My millennial ways can certainly make it happen, Mr. Petrosi.
Well,
I think the board just needs to instruct the peer reviewers to engage in discussion as long as the planning director is present and can represent the board. That's easy.
Correct,
A lot of towns do that.
correct.
correct. Thanks, Suzanne.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're clear on that. Absolutely represents the interests of the board and the town, when the peer reviewers are talking, and, easy enough to do in a conference call on the phone or Zoom, or we're doing it all over the place now, so, that's fine. Yes, Ashley, you will be part of their discussions. Okay. So just so everybody's clear, 2 nights from now, on Wednesday night, it'll be a chance for the neighbors to have input, and then we're looking out to November 2nd for
December.
I'm sorry, yeah, December 2nd, a chance for for us all to come back together and address some of the issues that have been brought up by the peer reviewers, and any other further discussion that takes place with the peer reviewers, Ashley, and the applicant's engineers. Okay, George, do you have any guidance for us at this point?
I have nothing to say further than what Judy already said. Sounds good.
Okay. Okay, any board members have anything?
Do we need anything in writing from Mr. Petrosi?
I don't think so, but I'm gonna ask town council, seeing that George is right here.
No, are we concerned about the deadline on the,
Always.
no, but are we still within the period? I just haven't checked recently the deadline from when you opened the public hearing.
Why I'm asking, I don't know either.
As long as we've agreed to continue the hearing, I think you're safe.
No, let me just pull it up really quickly. Bear with.
The 180-day period would be stayed until either the legislation is passed or the order's lifted. Is that right, George?
Correct. Already
Maybe.
passed 180 days.
Yeah, so. Right, so if you're past 180 days, and if that legislation I referred to earlier comes up, then you would have only had till December 1 to close the hearing.
Called it.
So I guess, but the fact, right now, right now, that legislation has not passed with the December 1 deadline, and you're still within the state of emergency, that you would have to close the hearing within 45 days after the termination of the state of emergency.
But I've already consented to continuing the hearing so that the 180 days is automatically extended.
No, I understand
Okay.
But it
Just,
I think it needs to be, in writing and filed with the town clerk, so that would be great if you could just send us a letter to that extent, and we'll file it with the clerk.
Needs to be filed with the town clerk.
Okay, Ashley, will you follow up with Mr. Petrosi if he needs the form? The form that we would use for an extension of a hearing, and just make sure that we have that before, actually very soon, so that we know that we're good until December 2nd. Okay. Okay. Anything else? Amy, you've been quiet. We good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Sorry, there's a movie going on in my background.
Okay, that's fine.
I believe we had a number, I don't know if we're moving off of this to minutes, but we have some minutes to take care of, so I don't know what the next step is.
Mr. Chairman, do you require my attendance on Wednesday night, Mr. Chairman?
No, but it is a public hearing, so you're welcome to be there, but it is not, it's a public hearing. This is really designed for the neighbors that have been hearing things tonight, to give their concerns and any issues that they have. So we're trying to break it up so that we can take these, the hearings, all our hearings, piece by piece, so that we're not overwhelming people. We've already been at it for over an hour and a half, and people have already worked their whole day, so we want to make sure that people are okay.
Mr. Chairman, do you need us at that meeting? Sorry, Lou.
Sean, no, nope, you guys, we've got
Get the night off.
Yeah, no, we do not need you. This is really, really for the neighbors, to raise their issues. Ashley, you'll be there, right? Wednesday, okay, good. Okay, anything else on the?
I do have to add, I would actually not, right now you're within your rights to not worry about the deadline. You're within the state of emergency and that legislation is not passed. I would wait to get a confirmation of an extension until you need one. So we can keep you posted. It's up to you, but right now you don't need a written extension from Mr. Petrozzi for December 2.
Okay, then we don't need one. So we'll just keep it like that, and if we need one in the future, we'll be in contact with Rosie.
Right.
You need a roll call vote to continue to Wednesday, though.
Okay, so could I have a motion to continue until Wednesday, October 28th at 7 o'clock on a Zoom meeting for the continuation of the Dupuy Street comprehensive permit?
So moved.
Moved by Suzanne.
Second?
Second by Bob. Okay, roll call vote. This is to continue until Wednesday. Bob Fitzgerald.
Aye.
Suzanne Murphy.
Murphy, aye.
Drew Delaney.
Aye.
Dave Anderson.
Aye.
And I'm John Lee. Aye. Okay, so we've continued this until until Wednesday, 7 o'clock Zoom meeting, and this is the purpose of that meeting. I've stated already. It's for the neighbors to have input.
And John, had you already noted that on the agenda, the intent to continue from tonight to Wednesday?
Yes.
Okay, good, because you don't have 48 hours otherwise. Great.
We also already posted the agenda.
Great. Thank you. Just want to clarify. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. We have some minutes to approve.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Cliff.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
You guys
Bye,
still need
bye,
me?
Judy.
No, bye, Judy.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Judy. Thank you.
I'm going to sign off as well if
Okay.
you don't need me.
Yeah, George, you and I will be in touch about the Burns Ave, how to, we've agreed how to proceed in general, but we'll just have a conversation with the specifics. Suzanne,
Ashley knows where to get me.
Yeah. And Suzanne, you're comfortable with that, right?
Yeah, definitely. It just felt wrong. I don't know.
Right.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're still on cable TV, Walpole Television. So could I have have people had a chance to review the minutes? Because I went through them. I was okay with the minutes. Bob, did you have anything on the minutes you wanted to?
No, I have no substantive comments at all.
Okay. Yeah. Suzanne, anything on the minutes?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm watching Amy's face light up.
Yeah. Drew, you good with the minutes?
Yeah, they all look good, John. And Amy.
Okay. So that being said, could somebody make a motion to approve the minutes? And you can just read the whole list of them
Lord, who's got the list?
on the agenda.
Oh, all right, hold on. Christ, I'll be lucky I can find anything. Agenda. All right, let me find them.
So I think
Up-
they're,
let me-
August 19th, 26th, September 16th, 21st, October 5th, and October 7th. Am I missing any?
Nope, that's it. That was all of them.
That's enough work for you, don't you think?
I'm just
Someone
glad
make-
there's no more edits. I'm happy with that.
I can't make the motion, so will somebody make the motion?
So moved.
Okay, motion to approve the minutes made by Suzanne. Could I have a second?
Second.
Second by Bob. Okay. Any further discussion? Nice job on the minutes, Amy. Feels, when I read them, I feel like I'm reliving the meeting. So,
That's too depressing.
so roll call vote on that. It's been seconded, no further discussion. Bob Fitzgerald,
Aye.
Suzanne Murphy,
Murphy, aye.
Drew Delaney, and Dave Anderson.
Aye.
And I'm John Lee, aye. So there we go. Amy, those can be posted to the website. Nice job on
Get
those.
them up tomorrow morning.
Okay, so, Ashley, do we still have some neighbors on, well, how many people did we have from the neighbors for the hearing tonight?
I didn't, there were a few, there were 10.
There were like 10.
Like 7 were neighbors for the Doobie Street project. Currently, we have, David Hale as an attendee and John O'Leary.
Okay.
On home. Or,
I just want to make sure that the neighbors understand, what's going on for Wednesday. This is their chance to address the zoning board with their thoughts and their concerns about Doobie Street. So, I think we got quite a bit done. We heard from the peer reviewers. We recognized the concerns and issues. Bob, I loved your questions. They were very lawyerly. And, I think that's going to benefit us as we move forward on this. So, okay. Anybody have anything else for the good of the board? Okay. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Suzanne.
Second.
Second by Bob. Okay, roll call vote to adjourn, and we'll be back at this in 2 days. Roll call vote. Bob Fitzgerald.
Aye.
Suzanne Murphy.
Murphy, aye.
Dave Anderson.
Aye.
Drew Delaney.
Aye.
I'm John Lee. Aye. We are adjourned. Okay. Actually,